At 7:14 in the morning, a manager at a hotel restaurant in Chicago calls a busboy into the back office and tells him he no longer has a job. The busboy is 19 years old. He has worked every shift he was given for 11 months. He has not been late. He has not been written up. He has done the job the way you do a job when you understand that keeping it matters. None of this, the manager explains, is sufficient. There have been complaints. Standards have not been met. The position is being eliminated as part of a restructuring of the floor team, and his services are no longer required, effective immediately. The busboy asks which complaints. The manager says that information is confidential. He says it the way people say things that are not quite true, but that are not precisely false either. The specific grammar of authority protecting itself. The busboy nods. He goes to his locker. He takes out his jacket, his phone, and a small photograph he has kept taped to the inside of the locker door for 11 months. A picture of his mother, taken the day he got the job, standing in front of the hotel with a smile that cost her nothing and meant everything. He puts it in his jacket pocket. He walks out through the service entrance. He sits for a long time on a bench in the alley behind the hotel because he is not ready to go home and tell her. At 2:17 that afternoon, in the dining room of the same hotel restaurant, a man in a gray jacket and dark jeans finishes his lunch and reaches into his jacket pocket and writes a number on the back of a receipt. The number is $10,000. He hands it to the young man clearing his table. He does not know the young man was let go that morning. He does not know the manager who made that call is standing 12 feet away. He does not know, yet, that what he has just done is about to become the most consequential action in the room. What he knows is the young man's name, because he asked it 2 hours earlier, when the young man brought him water, and that the young man has worked every table in the room with a care that deserved to be acknowledged. That is enough. It is more than enough. What the manager standing 12 feet away is about to discover in the next 45 seconds, in a way that will stay with him for the rest of his career, is that what is enough and what is visible are not always the same thing, and that the distance between them is where this story lives. There is a hotel in Chicago, Illinois, called the Vantage Grand, which stands on North Michigan Avenue between a department store and an architectural firm, and has been there for 31 years, in a building that was originally a savings and loan, which is the kind of origin story that Chicago buildings tend to have. The renovation that converted the banking hall into the hotel lobby was completed in 1993, and the architects made the decision, which was considered bold at the time, and which time is validated, to keep the original coffered ceiling, 28 feet at its peak, and the original marble floors, cream and charcoal in a herringbone pattern that had been there since 1961, and that would have cost more to replace than it cost to restore. The restaurant on the ground floor was called Meridian, which was the second restaurant in the hotel's history. The first had closed during a renovation in 2004, and which had been operating for 9 years under the same executive chef, a woman named Isabel Cordero, who cooked without adjectives and was the primary reason the hotel had maintained its 4-diamond rating through 3 changes in ownership. Meridian held 78 seats. It served breakfast from 6:30 to 11, lunch from 11:30 to 3, and dinner from 5:30 to close. The lunch service was the quietest, filling to perhaps 60% capacity on a typical weekday, attended by a mix of hotel guests and the Michigan Avenue professionals who had learned that Meridian's speed and quality at lunch was worth the slight premium over the sandwich places on the surrounding blocks. The man in the gray jacket and dark jeans arrived for lunch at 12:15 on a Tuesday in April. He had a reservation under his first name, which was how he made reservations when he was in a city alone and preferred not to be recognized before he had ordered his food. He was shown to table 14, a two-top along the east wall with a partial view of the street through the tall windows that the original banking hall architects had placed to bring light into what would otherwise be a deeply interior space. He wore the gray jacket over a dark shirt, jeans that had been worn in rather than worn out, shoes that had walked a reasonable number of miles in them. He carried nothing except his phone, which he put face down on the table when he sat, which was a habit he had, and which the server, a woman named Anna, 11 years at Meridian, who had seen many kinds of guests and had her own taxonomy of them, noticed and found, without consciously noting it, a point in his favor. He ordered simply a sandwich and a soup. Coffee to start. He did not ask for recommendations because he had looked at the menu before he sat, and he asked one question about the soup: how it was made, not what it contained, in the way of someone genuinely curious rather than performing curiosity. Anna brought the coffee. The busboy who brought the water was named Marco Reyes. He was 19 years old. He had the particular physical economy of young men who have grown up doing physical work, not large but precise in how he moved. Nothing wasted. He had been at the Vantage Grand for 11 months. Hired the previous May, the week after his high school graduation, because his mother's hours at the dry cleaning business where she worked had been cut, and the gap between what they had and what they needed had to be filled by someone, and Marco was available and willing, and had walked into the hotel service entrance on a Tuesday morning and asked if there was work. There was work. There was always work at the lower levels of a hotel restaurant, because the lower levels of a hotel restaurant require a quality of physical attention and reliable presence that is harder to maintain in a team than it sounds. Show up every shift, move quickly and quietly. Clear tables without making the guests aware that the clearing is happening. Reset faster than seems possible. Anticipate when glasses need filling before they are empty. Marco had been good at all of it from the first week, which his supervisor at the time, a floor captain named Rosario, had noted in his 90-day review in terms that were the highest she typically used. Reliable, attentive, invisible in the right way. He had not been reviewed again after that. The restaurant manager had changed 4 months later, and the new manager had not read the review, or, if he had not weighted it the way Rosario had intended. The manager's name was Derek Soul. Derek Soul was 43 years old, and he had managed the restaurant at the Vantage Grand for 7 months, coming in from a property in Minneapolis where he had held the same role for 3 years, and where his departure had been, in the language of hotel management, mutually agreed upon, which meant that he had left before the decision was made for him, and that the specific circumstances of his departure were not in the documentation that the Vantage Grand's HR department had reviewed before making their offer. He was a tall man who kept himself carefully groomed in the way of someone for whom the appearance of control is a form of control. He wore tailored shirts to the floor every day, a different one each time, and he had a way of moving through the restaurant that communicated ownership, not warmth, ownership. The specific claim a person makes on a space when they believe the space reflects them. He had grown up in a suburb of Milwaukee, in a house that was more orderly than it was warm. His father had managed a department store, which meant that Derek had grown up in the grammar of retail management. The floor was always someone's responsibility. The responsibility was always tracked, and the tracking was always visible. He had absorbed this so thoroughly that he had not, in 20 years of management, fully distinguished between a well-run floor and a floor that appeared to run well, because the appearance was itself the goal. The specific thing that had ended his time in Minneapolis, the thing that was not in the documentation, was a pattern his general manager there had named in a final conversation that Derek had replayed more than he would have preferred. A tendency to manage for the impression rather than the outcome, and to make decisions about staff based on how they presented upward, rather than how they performed for the guest. He had not agreed with this characterization. He had, in the 7 months since, done some things that did not argue against it. The decision to let Marco Reyes go had come from a complaint. One complaint, from a guest in early March who had found a water glass with a smudge on the rim and had mentioned it to the front desk rather than to the floor captain, which was the kind of complaint that in a well-run operation was handled with an apology and a clean glass. Derek had pulled Marco's personnel file. He had looked at the 11 months of unmarked attendance and the single favorable review from Rosario, which said invisible in the right way, and he had found, in that phrase, the thing he needed. Invisible was not a compliment in Derek's soul's taxonomy. Visible was the metric, the person who brought things to Derek's attention, the person who checked in before their shift ended, the person who managed upward. Marco Reyes had never managed upward once in 11 months. Derek had not mentioned the smudged glass in the termination meeting. He had mentioned the restructuring. The standards, the complaints, plural, which was a rounding. He had done it at 7:14 in the morning because the lunch service started at 11:30, and he wanted the floor reset before the first guests arrived. He had not thought about Marco Reyes again until 2:17 that afternoon, when he was crossing the dining room toward the service entrance, and he saw the man at table 14 hand a piece of paper to the busboy who was clearing his salad plate. The busboy was not Marco. Derek had hired a replacement that same morning, a young man named Tyler, 22, who had interviewed 2 weeks earlier and whose references Derek had already checked. Tyler was on the floor. He was doing well enough. He had introduced himself to 2 guests that afternoon, which Marco had never done, and Derek considered this a point in his favor. The young man at table 14 was doing something that was not standard procedure. Derek moved closer. He could see the piece of paper. He could see the number on the piece of paper. He stopped at the edge of the room, near the host stand, and processed what he was looking at, which took longer than he expected because the number was not a number the room at Meridian produced very often, and his brain required a second pass to confirm it. $10,000. He looked at the man who had written it. He looked at the young man receiving it. The young man, Tyler, was looking at the paper with an expression that was not surprise. It was the specific expression of a person who has been handed something and does not yet know how to hold it. His hands were not entirely steady. He was looking at the number the way you look at something when you are afraid that looking away will change it. The man at the table was saying something to him. Quietly, Derek could not hear it from where he was standing. He crossed the room. He arrived at table 14, as Tyler was saying, in a voice that was not entirely level. Thank you, sir, I don't. I'm not sure the restaurant can. It's for you, the man said. Not for the restaurant. He said it simply. He had the quality of stillness that Derek had learned, in 20 years of managing dining rooms, to associate with people who were used to being listened to without having to demand it. Derek said, "Is there a problem here?" The man looked at him. "No problem," he said. "I was just thanking your staff." Derek looked at the paper in Tyler's hand. "That's not a standard gratuity," he said. "No," the man said. "It isn't. There are policies around, I understand," the man said. "But this is a personal gift to a person who did his job exceptionally well. The restaurant's policies cover gratuities on the bill. This isn't on the bill." Derek looked at him. He looked at Tyler. He said to Tyler, "Why don't you go check on table 9? Tyler looked at him. Then he looked at the man at table 14, who gave him the small nod that releases a person from a room they are not sure how to leave. Tyler went to table 9. Derek and the man at table 14 were alone. The man said, "What's the policy?" Derek said, "I'm sorry? You mentioned there are policies. I'd like to know what they are." Derek was not accustomed to being asked this question in this way. The direct, quiet, genuinely curious way of someone who is not asking in order to argue, but in order to understand. He said, "Personal cash gifts to staff can create tax complications and equity issues among the team." "That's a real concern," the man said. "Have you talked to him about it?" A pause. "We can handle it appropriately," Derek said. The man looked at him for a moment. "His name is Tyler," the man said. "He told me when he brought the water. He's been here about 3 weeks, I think. He mentioned it when I asked how long he'd worked here." Derek said nothing. "He said the person who had this section before him had been here for almost a year," the man said. "He said he hoped he could do as well." Derek was very still. "Do you know who that was?" the man said. It was not a rhetorical question. It was the genuine question of a person who actually wanted to know. Derek looked at him. The room was quiet. Not the tense quiet of a confrontation. There were 7 other tables occupied, and none of them had stopped eating. But Anna, who was refilling water at table 11, had gone still. The host at the front stand had turned, slightly, in the direction of table 14. These things happen in dining rooms, the small redistribution of attention, when the temperature in one part of the room changes. "Marco Reyes," Derek said. "Where is he now?" The pause that followed was the longest pause in the scene. Not long in absolute terms, 4 seconds, 5, but long enough that what it contained was visible. Derek said, "He's no longer with us." The man said, "When did he leave?" Derek said, "This morning." The man looked at him. He looked at table 14, at the water glass, at the coffee cup, at the receipt that was still on the table, on which he had written $10,000 and below it a name. He said, "What was his last name again?" "Reyes," Derek said. "Marco Reyes." The man picked up the receipt. He looked at what he had written. He put it in his jacket pocket. He said, "I'd like the check, please." He said it without heat, without drama. In the exact register of a man who has understood something and has decided what to do about it, and is in no particular hurry about any of it. Derek brought the check. The man paid it. He left a 20% tip on the bill, which was the standard, and which he left in the standard way, as though this were any lunch at any restaurant and the preceding 12 minutes had not occurred. He put on the gray jacket. He picked up his phone from the table. He stood. He said to Anna, who was the nearest person, "Thank you. The soup was excellent." He walked to the front door and went out onto Michigan Avenue and into the April afternoon. He made a phone call before he reached the corner. He spoke for less than 3 minutes. He did not turn back. Derek's soul stood in the dining room of Meridian for a long time after the man in the gray jacket left. He stood there the way a person stands when something has happened that they cannot immediately process. Not shock, exactly, but the specific experience of a room that has just told you something you did not want to know about yourself, and that has told you in front of witnesses, some of whom are still present and pretending not to have heard. Anna, who had been at Meridian for 11 years and had seen 3 management changes and had opinions about all of them, went back to refilling water and did not say anything. The host, whose name was Paul and who had been at the Vantage Grand for 4 years and who had liked Marco Reyes in the specific way you like someone who does their job with consistent quiet competence, also said nothing. Tyler, at table 9, was doing his job. Derek went back to his office. He sat at his desk. He opened Marco Reyes's personnel file. He read Rosario's review for the first time with his full attention. Reliable, attentive, invisible in the right way. He read it twice. He sat with it for a long time. The phone on his desk rang at 4:15. It was the hotel's general manager, a woman named Christine Park, who had been at the Vantage Grand for 12 years, and who called when something required a conversation that email could not carry. The call lasted 22 minutes. Marco Reyes had gone home that morning and told his mother what had happened. She had listened without interrupting, which was her practice. And then she had made coffee, which was also her practice, and they had sat at the kitchen table for a while. She said, "What are you going to do?" He said, "Find another job." She said, "Not today." "No," he said, "not today." He sat with her for the rest of the morning. In the afternoon, he went to the park near their apartment and sat on a bench and looked at his phone and tried to feel less than he was feeling and mostly did not succeed. His phone rang at 4:40. The number was the Vantage Grand. He looked at it for a moment. He answered. Christine Park introduced herself. She said she understood Marco had been released that morning, and that she had reviewed his file this afternoon and wanted to speak with him. She said there were some things about the circumstances of his release that she wanted to discuss, and that she would like him to come in the following morning if he was available. He said he was available. He came in the following morning at 9 o'clock. He met with Christine Park for 40 minutes. She told him, without elaborating on everything, that a review of the decision had identified some procedural concerns, and that the hotel would like to offer him his position back, with a formal apology and back pay for the day he had missed. He took the job back. He did not ask about Derek's soul. Christine Park did not offer information about Derek's soul. What Marco understood, from the quality of what was said and what was not said, was that something had happened between the lunch service the previous day and 9 o'clock this morning, and that the something had come from outside the building, and that the outside the building thing had been sufficient to change what the inside the building thing had decided. He did not need to know more than that. He went back to his section. 6 months later, Marco Reyes was promoted to server, which was the position above busboy and which came with a different set of responsibilities and a meaningfully different hourly rate. His promotion review, written by the floor captain, who had replaced Rosario after she had moved to a restaurant in River North, used the same word, reliable. And then, beside it, a second word that Rosario had not used, because in her time with Marco the thing it described had not yet fully developed. Present, not invisible. Present. The distinction, as the floor captain explained it to Christine Park when she asked, was not about visibility in the managerial sense, not about managing upward or making noise. It was about the quality of attention a person brought to the room. The way Marco Reyes could be in a section of 12 tables and make every person at every table feel, without being able to say how, that their table was the one being looked after. That was the quality the floor captain had noticed. That was what she had written down. Marco worked at the Vantage Grand for 3 more years. He left at 23, not because anything went wrong, but because Anna, who had watched him for 11 months as a busboy and 14 months as a server, had told him that there was a management training program at a hotel group in the city that was worth applying to, and that she had worked with one of the program's instructors. And that she thought Marco should know that the application window was open. He applied. He was accepted. He was the youngest person in his cohort by 4 years. He called his mother from the street outside the hotel, where the acceptance letter told him to report on the first day, because he did not want to be on a phone call inside the building when it happened. She answered on the second ring. He told her. She cried. He did not, because he was trying to be professional about it, and he managed until the call ended, and then he stood on the street for a while with his phone in his hand. He went inside. Derek's soul left the Vantage Grand 8 weeks after the Tuesday in April. He did not leave because of an investigation or a formal process. Christine Park was precise about what was documented and what was not, which was one of the skills that had kept her at the same property for 12 years. He left because the combination of the personnel review and the conversation with Christine and the 4:15 phone call had produced, with a clarity that Derek was not able to dismiss, the specific knowledge that his time at this property was complete. He took a position at a hotel in suburban Cleveland, which was a smaller property and a lateral move in the language of hotel management, but which was, in a way he did not explain to anyone, the right next step. Not a demotion, a reset. He managed the restaurant at the Cleveland property for 2 years. He was, by most available measures, a better manager there than he had been in Chicago. Not transformed, the tailored shirts were still there, and the careful grooming, and the floor he moved through with the claim of ownership. But something had been adjusted in the calibration. He read personnel files now before making decisions. He asked Rosario-type questions in reviews. He noted the invisible ones with more care than he had. He did not become a person he had not been before. He became a more careful version of the person he had always been, which was not nothing. He thought, occasionally, about a gray jacket and a receipt and the specific silence of a dining room at 2:17 in the afternoon when the temperature in one part of it changes. He thought about it without knowing what to do with it, which was the most honest thing he could have done. I have been thinking about the $10,000 since before this story began. Not because of the amount, though the amount is what made the manager look up from across the room, and what the story needed him to see. Because of what the amount means in terms of decision. A $10,000 tip on a lunch bill is not a percentage calculation. It is not the standard grammar of restaurants. It is a decision. A specific, deliberate decision about what a person's attention to their work is worth when someone with the means to say so decides to say it. The man at table 14 did not know Marco had been fired that morning. He did not know Derek's soul was standing 12 feet away. He was not constructing a scene. He was making a decision about what he had witnessed and what it was worth, and how to say so in the most direct language available to him. That is what I keep coming back to, not the tip. The decision that preceded it. The moment. Somewhere between the water arriving and the check arriving, when a person decides that what they have been given, the quality of someone's attention, the care in how they do their work, is worth more than they were asked to pay for, and acts on it. Most of us notice these moments. Fewer of us act on them. The gap between noticing and acting is where this story lives, and where most of our days live too. He closed the gap. That is the whole story. Everything else is what followed. This story is fictional, inspired by Keanu Reeves' well-known reputation for seeing people clearly and acting on what he sees. If something in this one stayed with you, drop a comment and tell me what you took from it. Share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Subscribe if you want to be here for the next one. See you in the next one.